Oh my Lord.
What?
Um, is that, are you wearing something or is that like some trickery on the digital? Oh, look at that.
It's
Wow. What is that? Who is that?
it's Black Panther
Oh, right. He's got a lot more lines on him now than when I
than
remember.
than when Jack Kirby just drew him in black.
That's right. You know, uh, I forget what it was, which one of the Tomorrow's publications, but they did a whole thing on Roy Thomas,
Uh-huh.
and they asked a bunch of artists to draw one of the characters he had written, whatever. And I got assigned Black Panther, and I looked up a Jack Kirby type Black Panther, and I sent in the art, and I think they compiled it all into one big thing, for the issue or whatever it
Like a
was,
jam piece?
like a jam piece. Like it's a crazy thing. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. And I got to do this thing and help honor one of the perennial Marvel guys. And then a few months later, after that came out, I got a letter from Roy Thomas thanking me.
Oh, that's nice.
Isn't that nice?
This story could have gone so much worse.
Oh, I know. No, this is a nice story.
Yeah, that's good.
So, uh, yeah. And who was I talking to yesterday? Oh, I mean, we keep this in or cut it out, but why did you say that about Roy Thomas? Because of the Wolverine thing?
Amongst other things, yeah.
Right. So, uh, I was talking to Jim Salicrup and Danny Fingeroth,
Right.
who were there, and Ascenti as well, and a couple other 1980s, comics folks and 70s and all that. But I think it was Jim Salicrup that said that Roy absolutely was involved in the creation of Wolverine, according to him.
Mhm.
So he thinks that it's appropriate, whereas other creators have an issue, as we know.
I think weirdly this isn't the debate that I thought we'd start, but I think that the idea of an editor getting creator credit is kind of problematic to me. Um, you can make the argument that, well, what do you think Stan Lee's credits are, basically? And it's like, yeah, maybe, like maybe that's part of it. But I think for me anyway, an editor, and I do edit, I feel like my job isn't to help create something or help um, take credit for a creation. It's to guide and to let the creators come to that conclusion. My response, if I were, editing Wolverine or Incredible Hulk 181 when he first appeared, um, I tend to think that my solutions or suggestions would not have yielded the character that we have. I think it would have been similar and it might have been changed slightly, but I don't think that's what Wolverine would have been, the character that we see now.
Well,
And
I mean, you could say the same thing is true for Deadpool, let's say, right? Like,
yeah, of course,
I never read Rob Liefeld and Fabian. How do you say his last name?
Nicieza, yeah,
They, I believe, are the creators of Deadpool. But then Deadpool has gone on to become the Deadpool in the movies and the Deadpool everybody knows today. I don't think is necessarily the Rob Liefeld
right.
uh, Deadpool, let's call it. But that's true for even the Stanley and Jack Kirby characters. A lot of the
That's true for
iterations.
that's true for children too. Like you raise a child from birth, and by the time they're 11, 12 years old, they're starting to get their personalities. That doesn't mean that they're not the same kid, but they're really not. Like
Right.
grown up, like they're capable of making their own choices from like an even younger age than that, and they don't respond to the same stimuli as they would have. Like if I showed Sadie Peppa Pig, she might find it funny, but she's not going to sit and watch 8 episodes of it just
Mm,
because it's something she used to watch. Do you know what I
mm.
mean? Like it's just
But you know what might happen?
Hmm.
And I think it is around age 12 where we lock ourselves in and who we are, for the
Right.
rest of our lives. Is that in the future you start to go back to the things you liked when you were 12 or the teenage years, and
Mhm.
you want to revisit that, that nostalgia, or what was it like? It's funny, I just wrote a Substack post that I won't talk too much about here because I want people to read it. But it's I wrote about something I rejected wholeheartedly as a kid, as a teenager, picking up comics, and I was trying to figure out why and try to confront that. And I had this opportunity this weekend to actually be able to confront that, which will be in the Substack post. But uh, suffice to say, like, the things that define us is where we, roll, and then you find your tribes that way.
Right.
But also the stuff that we rejected also defines us, and then maybe we need to put that into better context, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's a question that I wanted to ask at one point, and I can ask it now. Um, was what's something that you were late coming into? Like, for example, I didn't discover the band Fugazi until they were just about finished putting out music. Meanwhile, I'm discovering them as brand new. So I'm
Hmm.
checking out all the new, like all the music and getting it up. And they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean they broke up? Or not even broke up, they're just not making music anymore.
What do you mean they
Uh,
died? All of
yeah,
them
yeah.
in the airplane, or
Um,
whatever.
it's relatively relevant to things that are happening in entertainment, at least this past week. Kendrick Lamar. I kind of knew one or two songs of his, and then the album Damn came out, and I was just like, oh my God, I need to recontextualize what I thought of him and like start listening to him more because like these are brilliant. And now, lo and behold, he is the conversation starter of a lot of what's going on this week.
Yeah, I was made aware of Kendrick Lamar actually when I was at Yaddo, the artist writers residency in Saratoga Springs, New York, and we're playing pool, and some dude, another artist, started playing this song, and it's the one, I forget the name of the song, but it's where Martin had a dream. Martin had a dream, Kendrick had a dream, kind of thing. And it's
Yeah,
just great song and the music, and there's some silliness in it and everything. And I kept playing it over and over and over again. It was infectious.
yeah.
So like I went and got that album. I liked it a lot. And then yes, I've followed some of his songs, and yes, he is the conversation right now because he won 2 Grammy Awards for like best record, best song,
He
and then the
won.
Super Bowl.
He won five.
He won five.
Yeah,
So that's a lot. That's a lot of,
rap album of
people
the
looking at,
year. Like, yeah, like
you know.
for
Uh,
for a diss track.
I know that's the thing.
That's the
Like,
craziest part.
tell me how many people don't like Drake
Yeah.
right now because my man got so. Anyway, and and that's a moment. He's having a moment, and that's what happens. And then you fade. And but this is the thing when you're talking about like for you, Fugazi's new, right?
Mhm. Relatively
Um,
now, but yeah.
Relatively new, right? For me, don't forget, this is how I feel. There are people, and I actually made a short film about this called There Is No Try, okay? And we could link to that. But it's all about spoilers, and there are some people who don't know certain things about Star Wars, for instance, that are
Right.
perennial. Like that I don't want to say here, even though it's absurd because quote everybody knows, right?
Right.
In fact, it's in the advertising of the new stuff that so and so is related to so and this and that. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's just a fact. Like it doesn't actually matter that that's a fact. What's interesting is how you arrive at it in the story by indulging it or coming and in fact my question, or I had a statement I wanted to make later that had something to do with that a little bit,
Mhm.
which is interesting. So, but in terms of your question about is there stuff that I've come late to, um, half the stuff I get into now, I've come in late to,
You know, in comics, the one that I remember recently, I'll say last 5 years, was Satellite Sam by
Mm,
Matt Fraction and Howard Chaykin. And it's weird because like when I posted about it, I was like, how did nobody tell me about this? Like, how is this not? We were talking last time about appointment TV. Like, how is
mhm,
this not the conversation starter? This is
mhm,
like everything that I want, like 1950s. kind of seedy, like because I read a lot of the Ed Brubaker stuff,
Right,
the stuff that Ed Brubaker does with Sean Phillips, probably more specifically, but I read all of it. And this is kind of not exactly in the same vein, but not entirely distant from it either. It could exist in the
right,
same shared universe if that were the case.
right.
And I was just blown away. Like, why? How am I finding out about this? And the book's not even being made anymore. Like,
Right. And it's funny because like Matt Fraction is well known for the stuff he's written, and Howard Chaykin is very well known not just for what he draws, but he writes most of what he draws,
right,
and he's very, very persnickety about who he collaborates with because they have to be a good enough writer who understands the page and the concept. So it was interesting that there was this collaboration between these two forces, right? And I do remember at the time it was published by Image Comics that there was talk about it, and it's a black and white comic, if I'm correct. So I feel like that might have hurt the sales a little bit, And Howard Chaykin is kind of controversial, for some of the comics he's done. Remember, I was his assistant in 1985 on American Flag
yeah,
with Larry O'Neill. And even then, American Flag was ahead of its time. It might even still be ahead of its time, right? Then he wanted to do Black Kiss, a black and white comic that had pornographic qualities to it. One would say without judgment. Um, and then he his most recent series, Hey Kids Comics, which he did 3 volumes of, is about the comic book industry. Thinly veiled stories of true stuff that happened.
mhm,
Um, but if you have not read The Divided States of Hysteria, the one that was truly controversial because people who didn't read it tried to throw him under the bus based on just the ideas of covers and whatnot.
right,
I mean, that's where it was almost like that was already baked into the comic, right? Where that's what he's kind of talking about is the prejudgments that people have, right?
right.
And they were trying to cancel him, some of these creators, and he even put it on pause. I know he has a sequel written, and I would love to see the sequel because it's a really good comic book.
Mhm.
And I don't even know if I'm sure you've heard of it at
I've
least.
definitely heard of it.
Okay,
I might have picked up an issue or two just based on what was being said at the time.
right, right.
And like the thing, this is a hard thing to really grasp as a concept, is that at some point or other, you have to kind of trust the creator to know what they're doing. That's not the hard part. That's kind of the easy part. The hard part is, what are you basing that on? Now with Howard, like I've read uh, American Flag. I've read a lot of his Elseworld stories for DC with Batman, like Dark Allegiance, which I think is one of the greatest things Elseworlds has done, right up there with Gotham by Gaslight. Um, he's got a particular way of telling a story, and he's got a particular way of revealing information that is nothing short of masterful. Um, you would imagine, because he's been doing this for so long. He's worked in TV, he's worked in film, I'm sure, and he's got storytelling ability. Just like across the board, generally speaking, storytelling ability. So when someone sets out to do something that has the reputation of being a storyteller, and something happens where within the context of their work, where um, something kind of untoward happens to a Muslim, you have to trust that he knows what he's trying to say. But it's almost like, I always thought Hey Kids Comics was a knee-jerk reaction by Howard to the reaction that he got for Divided States. And I mean, there might be a little bit of that. I've never really talked to Howard about that, but um, mostly because when Howard's talking, I just like listening. I
Hmm.
don't care what he's talking about. I just want to listen to what he
Hmm.
has to say. And I've never, I've never interviewed him, or, sat down and had a really tete-a-tete, or anything like that. But and and that time, like whenever I'm around him, I just find myself, and I think everybody does that knows him, I find myself enamored with the storyteller, and I
Hmm.
find myself just like, just listening and just like, yeah, that's really cool. Like, oh man, like what a great story. A couple of folks are like that, but I find that with Howard, it happens a lot more than not. So regarding divided states, I feel like almost not almost that he planned on that happening, because if he had, he probably wouldn't have taken a break for as long as he did. I think that the reaction to it and the controversy surrounding it are kind of almost to like unplanned, and that he's got to like, and he's kind of second guessing himself or something at some point. I don't think Howard has ever second guessed himself, but I think there's a part of him that is like, let's take a look at this instead of directly, let's look at it from the side, or let's film it from behind and see what the reaction is going to be from that instead. But you know, it's a shame you can't let somebody that is a tried and true storyteller tell their story. You know,
Well, I agree, and I appreciate that, and I think that's the whole point was that he's such a liberal left wing guy that when he's doing the right wing thing, that's a character that he
yeah,
is trying to get us to. Why is it okay that we can understand Thanos and Magneto or Magneto, however you say it? I say Magneto. Um, because they're well-rounded characters that you arrive at and you can almost understand where they're coming from, and then the line is drawn, you go, yeah, but you can't do that, man, kind of a thing, right?
yeah.
So he's
The,
creating characters that are villains or whatever you want to call them, or people that you don't understand, and maybe give some insight. He's not just willy-nilly, jerking off on the page going,
right.
oh, I'm going to just have some fun with this kind of a person. No, he knows exactly what he's doing. And you just, like you said, trust the author. They're
Yeah.
going to get you somewhere.
Especially, that kind of, I don't want to say storytelling technique, but that kind of technique of telling a story. Stephen Colbert made that his whole career for a little while when he was doing the Colbert Report on Comedy Central. He played a ultra right wing kind of
Absolutely.
character, but like meanwhile in real life, like, and I don't remember him, because maybe he was on Comedy Central. I don't remember him having to explain it,
Right.
every five
Right.
minutes, and
Right.
so maybe the jarring disconnect is when people that identified with that character
Well,
started
see,
watching
now
his
you're
regular show.
and the thing is, he remained in both personas, basically a straight white man in America.
Right.
Whereas Howard is writing a transgender character, or a Muslim, or all kinds of, a Christian, a Jew,
Yeah.
a black, a white, an Asian. Like he's hopping all over the place. And there was a time, and I don't know if that still exists now. I'm sure it does because of representation, where so all of a sudden you could only write what you could, your lane, what's in your lane,
Right.
and who you are. And I think we've even danced around that in our conversations here. And that doesn't seem super fair, especially for actors. Actors are supposed to, put on another person's pair of shoes and have empathy and try to understand where they're coming from. And now you're being told you can't do that anymore. You can only play what you look like, you
Right.
know? So anyway, but yeah, it is interesting where, like, and now you know how to bring this back to Roy Thomas and Black Panther,
Well,
except that there is, like, well, Mark Waid and a bunch of other, like, top pros brought in the idea of what an editor's job is. An
right.
editor is there to encourage you and to incite ideas, and then you develop those ideas and fully realize them as the writer artist, right? And that they're not supposed to take credit for that. And I don't know. I mean, now that I have some time to think about it, if you've come up with a name and a couple other things and that, maybe you're part of the creative process. I don't know. I don't want to get hit over the head with it, because
I
I'm
think
questioning it.
I think what it should be is acknowledgement, but not credit. Do you know what I mean? Sal
Yeah.
Buscema and uh, Chris Claremont. I don't think that's who the creative team was on the Incredible Hulk at that time, but let's just say it's Chris Claremont writing, Sal
Oh,
Buscema
Bill
drawing.
Bill Mantlo and Sal Buscema when I was reading it.
Okay, so let's say it's those two, and Roy is editing it. I don't think it's too much to say thanks to Roy Thomas in the credits box. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And let that be enough for you. But what the I think argument or the controversy is we have to ask the question, what money is he due? And the reality is, like Ed Brubaker was talking about the fact that he made more money on a day on the Winter Soldier set than he did for royalties on the Winter Soldier trade paperback.
Really?
Something
Oh,
something in that respect, yeah. Like it was something that like compared, like even though I'm getting paid
yeah.
for my creation, um, it's not nearly as much as I'm getting paid for the work I'm doing today, sitting here watching Sebastian Stan act like Bucky Barnes.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, what? So then, what are we fighting for, Roy? What are you like desperate for? Like, what does the money mean to you? Like, I don't see that man as being, dying.
Oh, I don't see it. I don't think he needs the money at all. In fact, I think there was a question yesterday in the conversation whether or not he's even taking any money. He just wants the credit because it's cool to have that credit, number one,
Sure.
you know. And I think so it really just comes down to credit. I don't know if it comes down to, oh, now we got to add another person to split the royalty pie on, kind
Right.
of a thing. I don't know. But it does give me pause and make me question, editorial insight. Like I I guess you could legitimately say, yes, you could legitimately say that I co-created the Purple Heart with you,
Mhm.
but you and Ricardo Venancio wrote and drew the comic, and I was just there on the sidelines helping you maybe crack some of the plot and see how it worked with my Red Hook story
Right.
and Seth Kushner's Brooklynite, and figuring out New Brooklyn and everything, our shared universe, as it were. And I definitely remember we sat in the same studio and cracked this,
Yeah.
and so I do feel like maybe I've earned my third of that pie. In fact, I think I even did one illustration or an idea for an illustration before Ricardo
Yeah.
kind of came up with
Yeah.
his.
It's
So,
in, I believe, in the Red Hook first volume.
oh, volume one, there's a drawing.
Yeah.
There's something in there. So that, whatever, that's fine. So, but I mean, I know I helped Seth with a lot of ideas. It's probably you did.
Mhm.
And Seth and the artists get their credit, and I don't think I have any credit in
I
that,
know. I know. I know. I think
So,
for me, with in regards to Purple Heart, like I made a conscious effort to credit uh, myself, Ricardo, you, and Tom Akel. And somebody, I can't remember if Tom said he didn't want the credit. I said,
mhm,
no, we made this together. Like
right.
the four of us made this together. Dean maybe doesn't have as much of a heavy-handed, everyday influence on the book, but like he does get to uh, weigh in on stuff. And Tom, like you gave the faith, like you made a good faith procurement of the property and you helped us out. So that's a four-man team. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like to me,
But that's a
even
that's
though,
a team but also that's a team, like, again, trying to parse that. Like, I think Tom, and we could, and I was actually thinking we should have him on the show. I was just talking to him the other day
yeah,
for an hour. And he's great to talk to about stuff.
yeah, yeah,
Uh and he would probably say that he was able to identify how, cool the idea was, ergo try to go sell it, get us
right.
paid, blah blah blah, contracts, everything else. Um but I think sometimes a really good editor is the one. It's like, what was Alfred Hitchcock said, or somebody said, I don't know, 90% of great directing is great casting.
Yeah,
So we were, and I think the lead writers, at least, of this universe, which was you, me, and Seth Kushner, was pretty good casting,
mm,
and even we could even add Adam McGovern in,
yeah,
and Paulo
yeah.
Leandre for oh,
Aquaria.
one of Aquaria. And that's kind of like the little secret, silent, our little Aquaman, for the universe, our sea character.
Going back to Savage Dragon, which we referenced a couple of episodes ago. Like you'd have to go search for Savage Dragon issues to see those little parts of New
That's right.
Brooklyn.
That's right. And actually, he just sent me. He has. a new, it's a 2 or 3 part. I think it's a 3 part, might be two actually. Aquaria comic that's coming out soon in
Cool.
the back pages of Savage Dragon.
That's even better.
So there'll be more.
Yeah. Uh,
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm sure if I really thought about it, I'm trying to think of like of a gem. Like, oh my God, Dean, you never were into that. Like, uh, I mean, this is silly, and it might like I never was into Bukowski, and then
hmm,
years after when I think you're supposed to read Bukowski, like in your college years or something,
yeah.
I read him years later, and I was like, wow, it kind of influenced me a little bit in my writing style because I like to rhyme, I like to get goofy, I like to get verbose, and really, really get a sentence all syrupy and noir. And
I like to say that you're a modern day beatnik in that respect.
thank you, thank
Like,
you. In
and
that
I
way,
think that's a like a high praise to me.
thank you.
Being
But
a Jack Kerouac fan and stuff, but yeah,
right, right. But with his writing style, I saw the simplicity, the beauty of simplicity. So I don't know if you ever read
yeah,
Bukowski,
yeah.
but
Women,
like,
Bukowski's Women is one of my favorite books. It's also a hard book to read,
yeah,
just because it seems like he's not a creep per se, but like he's so awkward and
yeah,
so un unrefined when it comes to the opposite sex.
absolutely. And
And I think he
maybe
worked at a post office too, didn't he?
so Post Office is one of my favorite. Uh Ham on Rye
Hmm.
is his like basically his origin story. And when I collected my street code comics from Zuda, I had a story in it called Beef with Tomato. I called the book Beef with Tomato in homage to Ham on
Yeah.
Rye. So anyway, there was something about how he didn't need to feel like he needed to flex with the words. Like he's a writer and a poet, and you would think,
Mhm.
oh, you're going to be rich with the words. No, no, it was the content that was rich.
You don't think he ever used the word ostensibly?
We got to get you a T-shirt.
Oh
We're
my
going to
God,
start
please.
that.
Now we have two T-shirts: the Dean effed my mother and ostensibly.
There you go.
Like quote,
There you go.
just a quotation, just a quote, ostensibly. Period. Vito del
Yep,
San.
yep. And it's funny because when I was talking to Chris Claremont the other night at the Captain America Brave New World premiere, as it were, for some reason we brought up the Wolverine. Well, we were talking about Roy Thomas and Wolverine, and I brought up like your famous line, your famous Wolverine line gets you into the Hall of Fame of Wolverine already. You didn't have
Right.
to do anything else. And then he said the line, and it's like weird to hear like the creator say the line.
I, I have a very, I wouldn't say love-hate relationship with Chris Claremont's work. Um, I at some point I kind of grew out of it. Like I didn't seek it out,
Sure.
like as I got older because it was maybe too much in the way
Mhm.
of words. You know what I mean? Like it was too verbose. But I would hope that when he passes, we all get together and like all the X-Men fans and people that were influenced by X-Men, and we get his tombstone and it says he was the best there is at what he did, but what he did wasn't very nice.
Oh, but what he did was awesome or great. You
Okay,
flip
yeah,
it, kind of.
yeah.
The best of what I do and what I do isn't very nice is the Wolverine line. And I don't know, man. I mean to be able to even write one line that everybody can quote, or like the Spider-Man line,
With
about
great power.
responsibility.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know. Uh just to be able to have that as a writer, to be well known for one bit of language.
I'm definitely not well known for this. I don't even know if anybody's ever caught it, but in the Stray books, I use the phrase crime fighting 101. And and Stray will impart a piece of information that his father taught him. And the reason why I do that is mostly because I'm trying to still impress upon the idea that even at 20, 21 years old now within the universe, and after quitting for 5 years, he's still kind of learning how to do it all again. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to so he's physically and mentally trying to remember the lessons that his father gave him to
Hmm.
put into practice now while he's crime fighting. So I try to always bring those up at least in one every volume, if not a couple of times a volume. My favorite one though is in volume three. Currently, I think it's in issue two. He says, uh, "Sometimes, like you can't be afraid to lose the fight because sometimes you'll lose the fight." And he's
Hmm.
being thrown out of a window at the time.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think, there's a lot of fun you can have with that kind of thing. Again, I don't think anybody notices like that. Oh, he did it. Like
Right, 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 right.
that Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen. I don't think anybody's doing that. But I think that for me, it's just like a nice little storytelling crutch that uh, kind of explains a lot about the character at the same time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's hard to identify a single line. Like usually it takes a bunch of lines to create an idea or something that sticks, kind of a thing, and to be able to land on a word even.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not easy, man.
I think, this it's also, I don't know that it's something that I was purposely trying to do in terms of the way I created Stray was I created it in such a way, and I say I, meaning the royal I, me and Sean, but in
Hmm.
terms of writing it, I'm going to say I. Um, in creating the character, um, I don't think I made this a thing until Sean and I started getting like the artwork started coming in and started making more sense. I
Hmm.
talked about it a couple of weeks ago about Underboss, how I looked at Daredevil villains and I did like analogs of them for Underboss. But with Stray, I did something similar where I knew Stray was Nightwing, so I knew he had to have a Batman or a Robin, I should say. When he started, he was Rottweiler, so Robin, Doberman, Batman. So that's familiar enough. How best to get a reader to understand exactly what you're doing without kind of holding their hand through it. So created a Superman character, created a Wonder Woman character, created a Question character, and like those were the other heroes of the Justice League, in the within the story. And the thing that happened was, I'm not even the first person to notice it. It was a reader um, had said something to me at a convention where they said I immediately knew who all these people were
Right,
just from the first four pages,
right,
even though I didn't know their story. And I was
right.
like, oh, that's the fringe benefit of it. And then I was like, wait a minute, that was cooked in, and I didn't even realize.
No,
Like,
it's baked in because people can reference, right?
mhm,
But then it's your job to either do what you would have done with those characters had you the right to do it at the DC comic or Marvel
right,
comic company, whatever, or you flip that script, right? You think
mhm,
because they're baked in, right? Certain ideas, right?
mhm.
I actually have a weird question for you, and you have to talk in broad terms for people who have never read Stray.
Okay.
What, and now you're writing something called Underboss, right?
Mhm.
What mistakes did you make on Stray that you're not going to do in Underboss?
Oh, there's a bunch. I could even say, what mistakes did I make in my issue of Superman that I didn't make in Stray, and then ended up making different mistakes, which is fine. You always make mistakes new, and you learn from them new.
Yeah.
Um, I don't, I don't want to, and I don't think I have to now. I don't want to do it as much hand holding to get you to see how awesome or cool or how thought provoking it is. The mistakes I made in Stray were mostly in volume two. And the mistakes were basically I had this story, this kind of grandiose story that I wanted to build around um, number one, the history of the Rottweiler. Uh, so Stray's history as a sidekick. I wanted to kind of say something about Black Lives Matter, and I wanted to give a couple of my friends their first published by a publisher, maybe not a major publisher, but a publisher that's put out by Diamond Comics, that their first exposure.
Hmm.
So I was trying to do a bunch of things, and the thing I think I won't do is I won't do gratuitous guest starring. Like I want to
Hmm.
do it where it makes sense and like it's fun and like we like me and the creators or creator are enjoying the idea of these two characters meeting. I did that with Eric Bennett, who does Steel Wolf. We did a
Hmm.
Steel Wolf Stray one shot, and that was fun. Like it was he wrote it. I am the de facto editor of it, going back to what an editor does. And really, all I did had to do was tweak my Stray's dialogue here and there,
Hmm.
and then just go. He'd be wearing this type of shirt in this scene, behind like while he's at the bar or whatever, or he'd
And he'd
be
be raising his leg to piss on the guy,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Instead of like standing, he has to have his leg up
He's not
at
squatting.
the
He's
urinal. Always at the urinal though. But and you've never lived unless you've seen somebody do that in real life. And I got news for you. I have seen someone do that in real life.
actually, let me tell you the one of my favorites. I won't name names, and you might even know who this is, but I went to junior high school. Look at me, I'm all red. I don't know if anybody
It's
watching
just
the video.
the light.
It's
Yeah.
a lighting thing. But I remember a friend of mine told me this story, and I think I've seen him do this too, because it's just what he does. He would go to a public bathroom, right? And if he just have to pee in the men's room, it's a urinal, right?
Mm.
And he would go to the urinal. He would, instead of unzipping, he'd unbuckle his pants and pull them all the
All
way
the way
down to
down.
like his feet, and
Mhm.
just and like our mutual friend was like, yelled his name out, like, "What are you doing? Stop!" Like, and everyone's looking around, and no one knows what to do because you just went the extra mile, like for no reason, man. You
Mhm.
know, like no
That's
reason.
that's the Chris Farley committing to a bit.
Absolutely.
And
No, but
and
he wasn't committing a bit. In this case, that's just how he did it, you know? And there was another time, a different friend of mine, uh, who we were talking and he had to go to the bathroom, which was like right next to his bedroom, but it was the kind of thing where the toilet was really like right by the edge of the door. It was like a tiny, real tiny apartment
yeah,
type
yeah.
thing. It was like on 10th Street between First and A, across the street from the Russian Turkish bathhouse. And so it's just old school apartment. Everything's a slant and steam is rising everywhere because it's so hot and you have to open windows. But I remember him going to go. He said I have to tinkle or something, and he goes and he turns around and pulls down his bed and sits on the toilet to pee. I was like, "What is up with? Am I doing it wrong, or am I just following like what's going on here?" And he
Well,
just said it
here's
was just more comfortable that way for him. You know, I'm
I,
like, okay, all
hey
right.
man, I'm 52 years old. I sit when I pee every now and again. Like it just like you know what
But
it
you're
is?
probably scrolling through your phone or reading a comic book or
That's
something,
number
right?
one. Number two, it's I'm on my feet the entire day. Just give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Just give me a second to just get
I
off my
mean,
feet.
next, if you could lie down and pee, you probably that's
That'd
next.
be stick it in the hole and then just go
That's
through.
right.
So going back to the friend of mine that lifted his leg, I'll wait till you swallow because
Okay.
you gotta understand if you pull your pants down,
Right.
they're only going to go so far. Even
That's
if you pull
right.
them down, they're at your ankle. You can't lift. So you have to understand he took his pants off of one leg just to do that. Like, are you kidding? Like,
Oh my God. That's
I,
so
I
great.
ran with a very problematic crowd in Staten Island.
You know what? I don't even know if I can tell this story correctly or really even makes sense, the punchline. But I had another friend in college who the dorm rooms had at each end was like basically like a satellite, like where it'd be all the normal rooms, but if you got like a five-person room, like you had your one or two-man rooms, but it was like a five-person room, it'd
It
just
was
be
like a
bigger
journey or
sticking out,
something.
right? So like there was a guy's five people room, and then if you looked across all the way, the other one that stuck out the other end was all girls, right?
Okay.
So for some reason, someone decided, you know what? They wanted to pull a prank. And so they would watch to see if all the girls had left and they could go and sneak in. And what they were going to do was to go in and take a dump in the middle of the floor of the living room, which is awful. and then run back, and then we would watch to see their reaction, whatever. And I don't even remember if I was involved or not. I just feel like those are the kind of things I would be involved in, but I don't
Sure.
actually remember if anyway. But what happened was he went over there, the coast was clear, right? And he goes, runs down the hall, and he's like ready to take a dump. And he goes in the middle of the room, and we're just kind of keep an eye out. And suddenly we see one of the girls is walking back, right?
My
Like in the
God, this
hall.
is
We have
this is Rear Window.
it's rear window totally. So we like had a guard outside, and we're like, but we didn't have cell phones back then. This is like the early 90s or
Yeah.
whatever, or late 80s. And like we're like, he's so going to get busted, so going to get so what basically happened is that she walked in the door and he was in shock, and he's in the middle of taking dump, or maybe he just finished, and the only thing he said was, ow, my leg, right? To distract her, because he was like such a weird position, like so that she was like, "Oh, you okay?" And he just kind of got up and ran away. And I cannot remember what happened next, but the fact that his instinct was to scream "ow, my leg" to distract her from seeing what he was really doing, to this day kills me.
It's incredible. So
Um,
I'm gonna ask you a
okay,
question. And
okay,
I don't know, it kind of fits with what we're talking about, but more it's more like a palate cleanser from the last 2 weeks. So the last 2 weeks we've had Russ Kazmierzak, who's working on his 54th issue of his comic, and then Marty Keene, we have him. He's working on his uh, L'Uomo L'Uomo Luce, I think, which is the man, the light man.
the light, the
Then he's got God,
Steel Streets and his
Steel Street.
Zuperverse.
He's got like the other one, like that he's starting to do, and like he's got one that he's wrote that he
Yep.
somebody else is drawing. Are we lazy?
Absolutely.
Like,
No, no, we're not lazy. No, no, we're not lazy. We're old. Okay.
okay,
Because like you, and this is something else that I wrote in my Substack, but you had mentioned something that I disagree with you with, unless I'd really gone down that road and I just didn't have the confidence, or I don't even think the ability, the skill set. You said that you thought I could probably have drawn 12 issues a year of a comic book,
yeah, at some
or at
point,
least pencil.
yeah,
Maybe, but my gut says no. I would have flubbed, I would have faltered, and I would have been fired, ultimately. And I'm wrestling with something I don't want to spill the beans on here, because it's going to be in my
subset.
Friday Substack or
Uh,
whatever. I mean, I could talk a little bit about here, but suffice to say, when I was a kid in early 1980s, there's the comic books you pick up because you like that writer, artist, that
right.
character, whatever. And then there's the ones you try because you're hungry for comics. You're like, I'll read some more comics. And I distinctly remember picking up an issue of The Flash, looking at Carmen Infantino's work, and just having an allergic reaction to it and thinking this sucks. And
Mhm.
I elaborate on that, right? So, but this weekend, and I've been thinking about, I want to revisit those Flash comics, not his early stuff where he was much, better, because you start to age out and you get older, and that's what I'm talking about, being old. But like, I want to revisit, like, what is that? And I'm always fascinated by the latter years work of my favorite artist, or any
Mhm.
kind of artist, just to see what happens, right? And
Uh,
I got 6 issues of a Flash run, you know, with Carmen Infantino art,
was
and
that
I'm
yesterday when you were at the
confronting this
show?
right now. And the fact of the matter is, he had to crank this out every 4 to 5 weeks, 5 weeks.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at, and an older professional, like a veteran, right? And I'm now looking at it with context, instead of contempt, you
Mhm.
know. And as a kid, you're like, oh, that sucks. They suck. I don't want to read that comic book. But now, and I'm not saying you're supposed to buy that comic book and like it, but I have such respect now for having done this for so many years
Mhm.
in the limited way I've done it, even though I've been doing it solely for 20 plus years, maybe
Right.
25 now, right? Uh, and it's insane, because I never had a real run of comics. I've done miniseries and this and that, but like, so anyway, I'm wrestling with this right now.
You know,
This fact.
do you remember when Grant Morrison went on to New X-Men and he did it with Frank Quitely, Ethan Van Sciver, and another guy by the name of Igor Corday.
Yep.
Igor Corday was lambasted because his art looked ugly, because it looked like it was like, like not like, I mean, anything compared to Frank Quietly's art's going to look ugly, and Van Sciver, regardless of what I think of his politics or whatever now, back then he was a solid superhero comic artist.
Yep.
Solid. So Corday, coming in from Eastern Europe, had this kind of darker tone to him and stuff, and he was made his name on Cable. I
Mm.
forget who the writer was on Cable with him,
And I
and
think it was called like something X at the time, or
something, yeah,
Soldier
like
X maybe, or something.
Adam,
Yeah.
whatever. So he like, so you look at his new X-Men run, and it's so like disjointed and so like out of nowhere, and it took me like maybe 2 or 3 years post him being on it. I saw him on something else, and I saw why he was hired. You know what I mean? Like his art's amazing.
His
It's
European comics are amazing. And in fact, I remember like I was fine with his X-Men art at the time it came out.
yeah,
But also I think at that time I was also understanding, oh my God, deadlines. Like what the hell? How do you
that's
do all this
exactly
stuff?
it.
You know? And then he went on to do, I forget the name of the graphic novel, and I think there was even a sequel or a collection. He did a comic with Alex the Campy,
Hmm.
where she wrote and he drew a scene that takes place like not in a subway, but an outside train,
Like an
where
elevated
trains get,
platform.
yeah, something like that. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the first scene in Once Upon a Time in the West,
Hmm.
um, the train scene there. That's
Yeah,
so outstanding, the
yeah.
choreography and the like. He is incredible,
He's
Igor Cadet.
he's amazing, and I find that
Yeah,
like a lot of the people at the time that were complaining about his work were just not forgiving enough of what the business of comics is. And and I say it all the time, like the train's got to run and leave the gate, and they got
yep,
to run on time. You cannot miss a
right.
stop. It's got to be on schedule. And the guy was doing 3 books at the same time and still making a schedule. Did the quality fail a little bit? Yeah, probably.
It suffered.
Probably had an inker that didn't know how to ink him. That's just doing the job. Because it's here's where the pencil line is, and here's whatever. So it might be the colorist muddied up a lot of his work. It's hard to say, but like I know for a fact that guy does not suck in the least. In the
Right.
And now going back to what I said about you again, I don't think you're like I don't know that you're capable of doing it now because it's you're a different Dean Haspiel. But I would say when we did Batman Adventures and you did Muties and you did a bunch of other those books, like not necessarily for Marvel or DC, but just like your work at that time, I think that's when you could have probably taken on a
Oh, that was a more cartoonier style, let's say. I mean, I still am cartoony, and I think I got better when I started doing the Fox and then the Red Hook,
Mhm.
But and I had created, I think, a pretty good shorthand on the Fox in some ways, because what I was really doing was I was taking my blue pencils and then
Yeah,
quote inking them with lead
yeah,
pencil instead of ink, which made it go faster for some reason, and it had a different look to it. But yeah, it was nuts. I just don't know what I would want my monthly artwork to look like, you
Mhm.
know? So it's but again, I think the bigger question, and we asked this before, is well, why does it have to be every 4 weeks a comic book?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that really what the market demands? I mean, Monty Keene would say, come out monthly. The minute you disappear, out of sight, out of mind. And I get
right.
that, but I also feel like we don't. Sorry, I mean, I'm too indie than I am mainstream these days.
No, I get it. I just
Fair.
think that the ability is there. That's what I'm saying. Like the
Hmm.
ability to do that work is totally there. I think um, the practicality of doing it nowadays is tough because you're older. Your responsibilities are much different. Yes, you see my son running back and forth trying to use the bathroom behind me.
What? Naked.
Yeah, yeah,
You got to
yeah.
tip that camera another way, I think,
No,
soon. Like,
I've got him hidden. Like nobody
okay.
can see him. I mean, if I you can see his face right there, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
I got him pretty well. Yeah, James,
Wow.
you're distracting from the podcast.
Oh my, oh
Uh,
my God.
James, you ever do an upper decker? No. Oh, okay.
Does he know what that is?
We will continue. Don't worry. We got it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, so
Thank you, James.
uh, I, it's funny, I've been I haven't been able to read Jonathan Ames's book, but I've been listening to it
hmm
on audio, and it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal.
I'm
And
halfway. I'm halfway through.
yeah, I think I'm in the last section. Like I'm just
Oh,
off.
let's just tell people we're me and Vito are reading Jonathan Ames's Karma Doll, which is the third in a series of. Is it detective? I don't even think
Sort
it's
of. It's kind of
particularly
like
detective.
a hard-boiled private eye, but there's much less of the procedural versions of Private Eye, and more he's just involved in some really nasty shit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, wait till you read after you finish this, which I'm excited to keep reading and finish. Go back to the first two.
Yeah, I'm going
Absolutely.
to.
You
I
know.
plan on. But my point in bringing it up is that I've had this long gestating novel in me for about 5 years now, that I wanted to just write and finish, and it's a very I would say local story, like it's
Uh-huh.
based in where I live right now and in some of the adjoining areas, Pittsburgh being one of them. And I like, I don't know what it was, but like I came home one day and instead of just like flipping through my phone on Instagram or whatever, I just started rereading what I wrote and I started going through and going, all right, I know where the story ends. I know I want where I want the story to go from here, where I'm at. um, let's just try to figure out a way. And now I'm going to say something relatively controversial, and I know that this is a debate that you and I had planned on having. I'm sure we're not going to do it today, but I've been using the Google AI Gemini to more or less be my editor,
Uh-huh.
like to say, okay, read this section, tell me, where I'm short, like think of it like, and like it'll come back with, you're doing too much showing, not enough telling. You're doing, and it's actually working. It's actually helping me, and having that kind of, and to help him do his homework. And
Mm,
he's really bad at math. So he,
me too.
so Gemini is again, it's not perfect, but at least it's giving me something to work off of. And what I'm hoping is that when I'm done, it doesn't tell me what to write. It doesn't write anything for me, which I think
hmm
would be the temptation. Like,
Right.
hey, finish this chapter for me, or what would what would you do in this chapter? And like, I don't need
hmm
it for that. Like, I'm
hmm
using it as a kind of de facto editor so that when I hand it off to, say, you or to an actual book editor or something,
hmm
it's
hmm
a little bit more, I don't want to say refined because it's definitely going to need refinement afterwards, but it's a little more of a cohesive thing to look at.
So here's my gut response, not having used any of these aids, let's call them, right? And that's what they are at the end of the day, they're aids. From what I understand, like AI, actual the stuff that we kind of are angry about, where we're whatever feeding the machine to spit out stuff that looks a lot like mashups of our stuff.
Right.
Um, uh, this as an aid might what it might be doing is this is just giving you common sense, um, uh, not mainstream, but let's just call it mainstream versions of ideas,
Right.
or what will sell, or what will do well, or what does the market like today, or whatever, blah, 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 right? And I'll give you an example. And for better or for worse, here's the example, which is when my parents identified that I could draw, right? They were like, "Oh, he seems to be doing more than what the other kids are doing," kind of a thing,
Mhm.
right? And so they went to my then teacher in like elementary school, whatever it was, and they said, "Hey, we noticed our son can draw better than some of the other kids, and it looks like he likes to draw. Should we start taking him to a teacher, an art teacher, to help hone that, whatever?" And the teacher, Mrs. Friend was her name, my teacher,
Okay.
said no. And they're like, "Why?" She said, "Because right now he's in this raw stage, this raw area of just exploring art. The minute you take him to someone and they start showing him what to do this, do this, do that, he's going to start copying that. Right now, it's like the Wild West."
Also going to think that they're wrong.
Say it again.
He's also going to think that he's wrong
Exactly.
because
I'm going to start
somebody's
thinking I'm doing
correcting.
something wrong, right? So, could I have used better training over my years of art? And even though I went to art schools and stuff like that, maybe, could I be a quote better artist or more commercial looking artist? Probably. But I also like that I can be a little wonky, and I yield toward that when I can find that.
Yeah.
And I think like you using that to help make it more cogent or whatever it is, or what's it missing, or what should we take out, you're literally just listening probably to what a basic editor would tell you.
Do you
And
know?
I'd rather you take more risks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the thing I'm basically thinking about is I because I never wrote anything long form like this before, I feel like I'm doing something wrong every time I sit down and that's probably why I procrastinated. And to I could easily have given the document to you, to Michelle, to whoever, to read and stuff. But that takes a lot of time out of somebody's like I said to Michelle, I was trying to explain something to her because I was trying to get I was trying to understand how the law enforcement in this area worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, so what happens when this happened? And she's like, well, tell me what the story is. And I was like, you got to read it because if I try to explain it, you're not going to get all the stuff. And she goes, just try. So I tried to explain. She goes, I have no idea what you're talking about.
But you know what? You know what's great about that? Even though you probably have refined it in your writing where it makes
Mhm.
sense, right? You got to read
Mhm.
it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Actually, talking it out. Like I'm sure having us doing this podcast has
Yeah.
helped us be, better talkers or writers or ideas people, whatever. Like
Right.
because when you're trying to convey something, there's a trick somebody told me once that I've never done, and I'd be afraid to do this, where someone was like, "Here, let me tell you. Do you mind if I tell you my story idea?" And they're like, "Okay, sure." And I'm gonna just start from the beginning. And the trick is this: you start telling the story. At the very beginning, people usually are kind of like sitting there listening, waiting. Okay, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then at some point, and let's say the halfway point, you say, "You know what? I need some water. Do you want some water?" They're like, "Yeah, okay." You go, you get some water, you bring back the water, and if you start talking about something else and they don't say, "But what about what happens next?"
Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they've gotten out of it because obviously they're like, whatever, I don't care, or it's just not intriguing or whatever. And that's an interesting thing to like, use as a tool, right? Like a,
Mhm.
a way to gauge. But that's I'm not saying to do that, but I do think being able to explain your idea and struggling is is the challenge.
Yeah.
That's where you learn.
Yeah. I mean,
So
that doesn't say that I don't struggle, when I'm writing. I don't write with it on, you know what I mean? I'll write what I write and then um I'll plug it in and just go, okay, seeing as how we've talked about this a couple, like in this conversation thread, like where are my, strengths, where am I, whatever.
absolutely, and again, if that's helpful and that
There's
actually
still
helps
there's
you on
still
your own.
my thing is like I, again we will do an AI debate at some point, probably more on
Sure.
the art side, but where I'm looking at it as is I'm still struggling doing the work. I'm still sitting down at my notebook or at my laptop trying to force out a chapter, like a day basically, and
Right.
just saying, all right, what can I take away from this? Like if nobody else is going to read it yet, what can I take away from it? All right, let's see what the AI says, and
Right.
then
Right.
just do those things. I think the the mistake in people's thinking of AI uh, for most art things is yeah, it's not writing for me. You know what I mean? Like I still like you said, there's your struggle. I'm still struggling to write it. I think when you talked about like the strike from Hollywood a couple of years ago to more recently, the fact that Marvel might have used an AI poster for the Fantastic Four,
Right.
where people are pointing out four fingers and stuff. Um, I think that argument is more valid, even if it's even valid if I were to be using it to write something. The
Mm,
thing is, like if it were writing it for me, I mean, I think it's like asking somebody to put up a wall. Here's your nail, but figure out what the hammer is going to be. And like I could go around and I can maybe find a pair of pliers. I could try the back of my fist for as long as I can, but at the end of the day, I need the tool.
yeah.
And I think that's what this is for me
Right.
anyway. Me using a tool
Right.
that's
And
available.
it's two things. One, I did write a short film screenplay. I think it's 10 pages, so it's like a 10-minute movie about this very thing you're talking about. It's an
Oh, cool.
AI movie that I should probably send to you. Maybe we can talk about it, and maybe I'll put it up on my Substack, right, at
Mhm.
some point. So it'll be something a conversation. And if you have a short script you want to send to me that we could also discuss, this could be part of our creative process,
Oh yeah, yeah.
aspect of this podcast. But to go back to, and I realized I didn't answer my own question to you about what did you learn from Stray that you
Mm.
wouldn't put, right? So the one thing I've learned, I think, is uh, exposition. We're all trying to hide the exposition, where you're explaining things,
Oh,
because
you know
sometimes you
why?
have to,
It's the same reason why you do it on the show. You always say context, like
yep,
give them context and stuff. And the reason why is because number one, I think very often we think the other person is we're talking to ourselves, so we feel like we don't have to explain anything, which is
right,
you know it goes back to what the AI said: show don't tell.
that's
And
right,
the other thing too is that so number one, we take for granted who our audience is, who's reading, watching, absorbing whatever we're putting out. The other two is the other part of it is that it seems this is going to sound maybe offbeat, but it seems uncool to have to explain yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like
well, uncool for certain characters. So what I've discovered is that, well, a couple of things. When the story starts to get unwieldy, you're like begging the writer or the creators to be, could you catch me up real quick, please?
Mm,
I love it in a movie, especially the third act, where the characters kind of remind you what this movie's about, where we're going, what happened, and what we got to do next, right?
mm,
Like, I don't mind that ever. Like Mission Impossible movies or something, where they're like, okay, that was all awesome, and now I'm forgetting why the hell what the movie's
yeah,
about. And like, remind me what the movie's about. Okay, these are the stakes. Great, thanks. Okay, because some other character has to be dumb, right? So that the dumb character's like, what the hell you guys are doing? And
right.
they're like, okay, stupid, this is what we're doing, right? Kind of, and that person is me. Okay, so half the time, I mean, I'm pretty good at paying attention, but at the same time, it's good to be reminded. And I do think, one of the directors of two of my plays, Phil Cruz, uh, would sometimes sit with me with my scripts, and we would go through line, and once in a while, he have a note. He's like, "Do you need to explain all that right here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm like, I need to say that because like I'm afraid that the audience might lose the thread or something like that." And and he'd be like, "Trust me, sometimes just keep it going. Don't worry about it. They'll catch up." Okay, because there are other instances when you talk about showing and telling, when you have physicality, when there's physical things, people doing things, they catch up even in the action
Mm,
of doing things. And I thought, oh, that's a good note. And he also said, sometimes if like, what I'll do is if like I mentioned Tarantino or Vito or something, I then like to give context all the
mm,
time, right?
mm.
Now, in this case, I think it's fair, but like when people are really talking, when you and I are talking, we're not always giving context the way we do on this show, right?
Sure.
Because we understand each other and we understand when you say a name or a comic book, you don't need to explain it, right?
Well,
So, yeah,
there's also like you'll throw out a like a pop culture reference.
right.
And did you ever see blank movie? No, I know it exists, or no, I've heard of it, and then like the natural inclination is to give context to it. Once what I do now sometimes is no, I haven't seen it, but I know what it's about.
Right.
So that way I
Right.
can be on the same relatively
Right.
same playing field
Right.
that you are, so you can just keep going.
So,
Um, what was
well,
it?
okay, well, I'll
No,
say
good.
real quick. So, if I mention something that someone doesn't know, and it's among characters, and they're just making a reference to something, so they can get to the point of what they're trying to say, the note was, "Well, not everybody has to know what you're talking about. Like, you don't always have to stop and explain all the time. Sometimes they'll just catch up within the inference of what you're talking about."
Yeah,
And then they'll be like, "Oh, that's what you mean by saying that name or title or whatever or
I think
reference."
sometimes as writers, we will confuse the audience with another character or another character for the audience. So
Right,
we have to feel like the dumb character, quote unquote. He has to have everything spelled out for him.
right,
And we're keeping that character and we're saying this is the audience.
right,
And that I think that's what that note is saying. Like you don't have to do that. Let that person, let that character catch up naturally within
right,
the context
right,
of the
right,
framework of the story, and then
right,
they'll be on the same page. I
right,
think that's
right.
what we're saying.
No, yeah. So it was good to like learn that because I'm always getting worried, like, oh wait, I know what I'm saying because I'm writing to myself and I'm writing five characters that are probably basically all me in some iteration. But there's got to be the person doesn't really is catching up slower than the rest, in
Right.
some.
Right.
So for
Yeah.
those very reasons,
Yeah. I don't. Like in answering that same question about like I always try to whenever underboss, I'm trying something different. Pay the devil, I'm trying something different. And what I'm trying to do more than anything is to just be like, this isn't necessarily stray adjacent, or it is stray adjacent, but it's not something you need stray to like need to have read 3 volumes of stray to understand. Um,
right.
I also do recap pages now. Like after the first miniseries, I've started putting recap pages on the same page as the cover gallery.
Mm-hmm.
So that way, like when I have alternate covers, like that way you have something to kind of like bring you back up to speed. God knows it's been 2 years since I put out the first one. You're going to need it,
Oh,
for
absolutely,
you know what I mean.
absolutely.
So I I I don't want to. I don't want to assume that even the people that I'm selling my books to or that are my Kickstarter backers, I don't want to assume that they've read everything that I've written, even on Substack or on
Mm.
Kickstarter, as petty as a Kickstarter update. You know what I mean? Maybe everybody gets the email, but not everybody reads it. They're like, "Oh, Vito sent an email," whatever. So I try to cover my bases as much as possible, but there's always invariably somebody going, "I didn't get the email with the digital edition" or something like that. Like, and that's fine. Like I'll catch you up, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't want to ever be being considered lazy to me is like I can't stand laziness, and I am a lazy person. On top of it, and I think when I'm in my element, when I'm writing and stuff, I can justify. I was doing research, or I
Mm-hmm.
was reading an
Mm-hmm.
article or something like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and like, but it still feels like laziness. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, we don't forget you could be lazy, and I definitely can be lazy. But the thing that I don't incorporate into my daily life is the sense of vacation is the wrong word. It's more like I'll equate it to going to the Russian Turkish bathhouse and being there for 4 or 5 hours in a hot tub and steam room to reconnect or to stop
mhm,
thinking.
mhm,
It's okay. And that's actually that's important to do too, because the more you thinking, you all the neurons are misfiring and it's going crazy, right? And you're like, after a while, you're like, but wait, why aren't I getting it? It's because you're thinking too much, or you're working on it too hard,
right,
cut it out already. And maybe your idea isn't good enough right now. Let it simmer,
yeah,
kind of a thing. Um, so yeah, I think that's what happens. Anyway, I actually did have another question, but I don't know if you're up for it or not.
yeah, good.
All right, this one I wrote down. And before I read it to you, and in fact, it wasn't like well written. Before I read it to you, This has to do, well, here, let me see what I got here. This is a series of questions that I get asked often, and I think in my older age, you can call me a curmudgeon, but there's a reason for what I
When you
want to
say
talk about
asked
here.
often, do you mean like at conventions and stuff, or
Just in general, I think we do this to each other every day. I don't do this because of my philosophy behind it, but I understand why people do this every day because it's what social media is half about. Ready? So
yeah?
here's some questions that people ask. I'm going to ask three questions, but don't answer them because I'm going to get into what this is about.
Okay.
Here's one: should I watch this movie? Is this movie a hit or a miss? Tell me if this movie is worth my time. And then I think my time, I have no idea what your time is worth. Here's
Yeah.
the thing: I would never advise anyone to not see a movie, not read a comic book, not listen to a song, etc., etc. I believe everyone should experience what intrigues them and determine their own opinion. Way I see it, more folks doom scroll more hours per day than it takes to watch a movie. And I feel I've gotten more out of discovering a crafted experience, if a crafted experience works for me or not, rather than thumbing my phone on screen. The bottom line is to take a chance, watch a movie. You don't like it, no big deal. Watch another one. Any feelings or thoughts behind that?
I feel like that girl in front of your uh, panel yesterday really got to you.
Oh, that and then
That was a
other.
that was a conversation off mic, so we're not going to bring it up because it's a little
That's right.
it's a little off topic. But
Yeah.
um, I don't, Jim Hanley used to have this philosophy, and he always called it the third aisle rule. I think that's what he called it, but that's how I always remembered it. And it was in aisle one, there's Vito and Dean talking about a comic book. And we're like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. This sucks. And in aisle three, somebody's hearing us talk about that. And they're like, I was going to buy that. I think I'm not going to buy it now. Nothing means, there's nothing that says that the two of us are tastemakers,
Right.
in that moment or at all.
Right.
But to that person who was interested, we just turned them off to checking something out that they were probably still going to enjoy.
Right.
So I always try to keep my not my comments to myself, but my criticisms to myself, unless I'm legitimately asked. Like, I've often toyed with the idea of doing a portfolio review at a convention and just going, no, these suck, but
Mm-hmm.
with the caveat that, like, I'm going to tell you why,
Mm-hmm.
like, but it's always easier to take bad news when it's covered in chocolate. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when I've done portfolio reviews, I've said this helicopter is that you drew here is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's in the right perspective. It's like, within the frame of everything, it looks great. And then I'll go, your anatomy is a little bit shoddy, especially when you get into these like miniature shots. Look at, something from far away. It doesn't really look like that.
Mm-hmm.
We're I don't know if this is the result of the participation trophy generation or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just, it's easier to take bad news whenever it's a little bit sweet.
Well, for me, and you kind of veered in a different direction. Actually, I want to tell a funny George Perez story. Uh, but I I have I have gotten texts, I've gotten emails, and you have a conversation, and the idea that like, is this worth? And I used movie as an example because yeah, it takes longer to read a book and less time it takes to read a comic book, or even less time to listen to a song, right? And the idea that I'm going to know what best suits you or you like or whatever, is okay. I get it. Like, oh, I love Vito, what Vito likes. Did he like this thing? And they might want to know, right? Or same thing with me or anybody, right? And so I get that it's a natural inclination to ask, but but I also don't want to take that away from you. Like maybe you'll like the thing I hate, and maybe you'll hate the thing I like. And so I don't know how I feel about reviews in general. I never I never read a review ever until after I've seen the thing I wanted to see. And then I go, well, what do other people think? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
Did they understand that part? I had to whatever, or do they totally get that part that nobody else got? Like, then I'm interested in reviews, but I never read a review of anything. I just don't do it. And maybe I'm harsh. Maybe I'm a jerk about it. I don't know. So that's why. And then we're also talking about 2 hours when really you're wasting so much more time in other ways. Like
Oh yeah.
indulge the thing, just
Oh
indulge it.
yeah.
So here's the quick George Perez story. I think it was a Baltimore Comic Con, and there's George Perez with a line around the corner. People wanting to sign comics, but people coming with their portfolios, right?
Huh.
And this one kid brought up his portfolio, and he looks at it and he's reviewing, panel one, page whatever, all, and then going across and looking over, and I'm kind of watching him from afar, like, what's he going to say? Like, what is it? I don't know what it looks like, right? At all. But I'm just curious. What do you do? Because I've been asked this and I'm always like, oh my God, am I going to say the wrong thing? Do I even have, a smart enough palate or intuition? He finally starts to say this. He goes, hey, so you see the way you draw people? He's like, yeah. The kid, he's like, you see the way you draw backgrounds? He's like, yeah. You see the way you draw props? Yeah. You see that perspective line, the way you do perspectives and everything? And he went through a whole deluge of, things. Do you see the way you do that? He goes, yeah, don't do that like that anymore. Stop doing that. Instead, go look at real people. Go look at, and like it was the whole thing of like what to do kind of a thing,
Right.
right? But
Right.
it was such a soft smack in the face
Yeah.
in a helpful way, like in a kind way that I was just like so charmed by the way he just kind of tore him apart, but
Mhm.
then built him back up, this guy.
Yeah. Keep in mind, we were going to call this podcast at one point, "You Suck, We Told You."
That was your idea.
Yeah, it
That
was my
was your
idea.
idea.
Anyway, let's cap it off for today. We'll be back next time with another bunch of old man musings and, and curmudgeonly thoughts. Thank you, Dean, very much.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone,
Vito.
for watching. Oh, before we go, if you're one of those industrious people that likes to do like animation and you want to make an animated opening for our video show,
Oh my God.
contact us. We would love it. It could just be as simple as my stupid head peeking out of the curtain, and then it's just that. But I can't animate. Dean can't animate. We just figured let's put it out there. Who knows? Somebody might know. But thank you very much, everybody. Yay, yay.
Yeah, yeah.